And so that information gap is leveraged in a way that does incredible damage to just normal people, especially the poor all over the world.
In the monetary level, and then all the other levels that are built atop the monetary level
Yeah.
are just deferring that responsibility.
And again, as long as we're offending people, Luke, we might as well just try to offend as many people as possible. I mean,
Yeah,
like
let's go for it. The hard times we are in right now are the good times of the next 20 years.
The reason why Christians should care about this is because truth matters.
For those that don't know who you are, could you just give a little background of you, of
Sure.
Thank God for Bitcoin, and what you're doing here?
Sure, yeah. So my name is Jordan Bush. For the last, up until about a year and a half ago, was a pastor and missionary in Montevideo, Uruguay. My wife and I, alongside a team, helped plant a small church down there. And then throughout that process, near the end of that process, during COVID, I helped co-author a book called "Thank God for Bitcoin," and then in the aftermath of that, the book was again for what far beyond what we could have hoped or expected. It was really well received, and so then we did a couple events surrounding that, and the last event that we did for Thank God for Bitcoin, in the aftermath, we just were talking about the potential of launching a business that would create resources to help the church, capital C church, understand both what Bitcoin is, and even more than just Bitcoin, what money is, like what is it designed to do and be, and then why that matters. And so some of the other authors of Thank God for Bitcoin, as we were talking about, just said, "Hey, we'll fund this. We're willing to fund this if you're willing to do the work." And so I said, "Hey, let's do it." So since July of this past year, that's been my full-time job. Again, there's way more details, between how the missionary side ended and how this got started, but that's the nutshell version. So
Yeah, it's always a longer story, and there's
yes,
always so much time. But
exactly. Yep.
that's great. That's really interesting. It was quite a pleasant surprise we reached to uh, have you reach out to me because
Yep.
I'm familiar with Thank God for Bitcoin. So I'm very grateful to be speaking there too. So I look forward to meeting you in real person and everyone
Yep.
else with the organization. So
No,
yeah,
100%.
that's
No,
great.
we're thrilled you can be there. So
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah, I'm glad. And if people don't have their tickets, they should definitely get their tickets. They should
Yeah. So
get one, and
yeah,
then
if you go to
coupon codes. Yeah.
tgfb.com, we're going to be doing a 2-day conference in Miami, the 16th and the 17th, which is the 2 days before the 3-day Bitcoin Magazine conference. So if you want to make it a week event, you can come down and we'd be happy to have you. We have a bunch of people within the Bitcoin world, well, at least one really known name within the Christian world, which is Pastor C.R. Wiley. He's an author, pastor, podcaster. He's a podcast over at the Theology podcast, which is one of my favorite podcasts. And then Zuby is more of a freedom maximalist who is going to be there as well. So yeah, and then just a bunch of people within the Bitcoin world: Preston Pish, Greg Foss, Larry Lepard, Giacomo Zucco, Alex Gladstein, just BTC Sessions, a bunch of these guys within the Bitcoin world who you know or might not know, who are going to be there. So including Luke. Luke will be there.
Yep, I'll be there. And if I understand correctly, I'm told that there's what is it, 15% off if they use my
Yes.
name
Yep.
at checkout. Yeah,
Yeah.
so
If you
there you
use
go.
promo code Broyles at checkout, you can get 15% off any of those options. So
Here you go. Yep, save a little bit of money. So
yep.
so you just outlined the conference very well, both as an advertisement, but
Yep.
also just as an idea of what it is.
Yep.
So could you explain why is it important? Why are you doing this specifically? Because a lot of people, it's very interesting. A lot of people online, the two areas I'm most vocal about on Twitter and YouTube and whatnot are Bitcoin and Jesus.
Yep.
And a lot of the Bitcoiners are, you know, have the view, why talk about Jesus? Because Bitcoin is math, Bitcoin is truth.
Yeah.
Trust don't verify. It's, versus religion. It's based on faith and everything of that sort. And then a lot of the Jesus folks are, why are you all about Bitcoin? Because,
Yep.
Jesus was about giving to the poor and not about
Yep.
hoarding wealth and not about
Yep.
materialism. So
Yep.
it's quite funny.
Yep.
And I think most people, are
Wait,
oblivious.
wait, Luke, you're saying you get that kind of pushback from both those groups? Wow, that's weird. That never happens to me.
Yeah, 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 just to clarify, almost always it's respectful and it's
Yeah.
positive,
Yep.
and it's not usually hateful. Once in a while, it's very
Yep.
vile,
Yep.
but usually it's polite. And I
Yep.
have my own thoughts of that, of course, but I'm more interested in hearing your thoughts about that.
Yeah. So the question as to why this matters, again, so within a biblical worldview and within the framework of what it is to be a Christian, you have this problem with the idea that we can compartmentalize parts of our lives, and we can say we can section off this or cordon off this part and say, hey, this is spiritual. This is going to church, obviously spiritual, praying, spiritual. But then you have like real life over here, and that's different. And so, there's problems with that biblically, namely that Jesus is Lord of all. That's one thing. Another thing would just be within the book to the Corinthians, for example. The Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, "Whether you eat or drink, do all to the glory of God." Whether or not this is a targeted shot at Genesis 3 or not, it applies equally. I mean, if you think about the Christian message is that humanity, experienced, basically, oh my word, I can't even think of what the word is. Humanity experienced the fall as a result of taking and eating a piece of fruit. Now, obviously, there was much more going on there than just the eating of the fruit. It was what was motivating them, and this is the reason why things like money, everything, including money, is spiritual. What you do matters. It speaks about the nature of reality. It speaks about the nature of God, His lordship, all of these kind of things. So if eating a piece of fruit, or rather what motivated the taking and eating of a piece of fruit, was sufficient to cause the entire human race to experience very real and dire consequences, we shouldn't be surprised that that all kinds of other things that seem like they're not big deals would actually be very consequential. And so when you think about what money is and the role that it serves in society, you may say many things about money. You can't say that money is not a big deal. It's incredibly consequential. Another thing that I would say is, and I'm working on a piece to this end, is basically money. People take issue with talking about Christianity and Bitcoin, and what on earth does one have to do with another? And so within Christianity, there's the idea of a worldview. Christians have an idea of a worldview. This is a narrative framework through which we see the world, we see everything in the world, we see ourselves, we think about ourselves. The way that we look at the world is through a worldview. Everyone has a worldview, whether they understand it, whether it's well developed or not. Everyone has a worldview through which they process everything that happens to them. And so when it comes to money, what we need to realize is that different worldviews produce different outcomes, and this is not happenstance. This is a natural, this is a natural consequence of certain beliefs. Certain beliefs produce certain outcomes and actions, and so within a Christian framework, money will look different. It will necessarily look different than a situation where if you have a narrative framework where, for instance, within atheism, if you have a framework where at the end of the day humans are the end all be all, they are the standard by which we judge everything, then you're going to have a very different set of priorities and actions that you take, given that difference of, on the one hand, within Christianity, Jesus is God. Jesus sets the table for what is normative. Also, according to the Christian framework, Jesus has designed the entire universe, including people, for specific ends. And so you're going to have, according to certain ends, and to function alongside certain priorities. And so that is going to look vastly different, or at least there's the potential for it to look very different than a world in which people are the end all be all of all things. And there's no God who is defining what it means to be human, what it means, what human flourishing means, all of these kind of things. So again, we can go more into this later, but just basically it's necessarily like what you believe about the nature of the world will affect how you think about everything else in it, including money. And those differences make those consequences of those ideas are huge.
Yeah, so then I guess I would say most Christians would agree with everything you just said, but
Yep.
I think most Christians would then stop and
Yep.
they would say, okay, but right now the dollar is the money. Why spend the time working for Bitcoin? Yeah, sure, the dollar's not
Yep.
perfect. The dollar has insiders. The dollar has control. The dollar,
Sure.
has inflation. It has all these bad
Sure.
things, but Bitcoin has, insiders too, and it has places of corruption, and no money's going to be
Yep.
perfect, and this is a fallen world. So
Sure.
why spend the time working for this competing form of money
Yep.
when we have a form of money now that works just fine, and we can still teach the gospel, we can still teach morals and biblical values with
Yep.
this form of money? Like, why spend the time
Yeah.
instead of doing mission work, instead of doing actual
Yep.
Jesus things? Why do
Yes.
this? Why? Mhm.
Yeah, and it's a fantastic question, and it's a question I love to talk about. And the answer is, why should Christians do anything? I hate to be the philosophy student. I studied philosophy in college. Hate to go there, but at the same time, the question is, why should we do anything? And the Bible gives answers to that question. Somebody came to Jesus and asked him that question. What is the greatest commandment? And Jesus said, what do you think? And the guy said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so that is what drives what we do and don't do. And obviously the tangible effects of that in terms of like the day-to-day what you're doing are affected by that. And obviously preaching the gospel and making disciples should be a huge part of what we are doing. Like I'm not debating any of those things. I've been a missionary. Like these things are not up for debate for me. But at the same time, that loving your neighbor is going to look different for every single person. We all have different jobs that we do. There's different places that God has uniquely designed and ordained that we live and minister through. And at this point in human history, at this point in redemptive history, there is in terms of the understanding of what money is and the effects that it has in society, there's not a lot of understanding of that. And so that information gap is leveraged in a way that does incredible damage to just normal people, especially the poor all over the world. And so again, on one level, the reason why Christians should care about this is because truth matters. Truth matters a ton. Truth is figuring out what truth is sets you free in a myriad of other ways. Like it basically has very real effects of how you live, what you do with your time, how you prioritize. And so again, the nature of the role that money serves in society is such that when you have a money that is not aligned with the priorities and the principles that God made to govern the world, you cannot do that without there being necessarily like drastic consequences. And so again, that's part of part of the answer that I would give is, again, if you look at history, where there is fiat money and where there is, and fiat money is money that denies the foundational realities that God made to govern the universe. Number one, to sum up one of those, it's basically the principle of sowing and reaping. And so this is something I talk about all the time is because it was one of the first things that really impacted me about Bitcoin. So why does sowing and reaping, like that doesn't seem like a big deal? Sowing and reaping is the bedrock upon which God has created the world. Now, again, why should you believe that? The Apostle Paul in the book of Galatians says, God is not mocked, for what a man sows, he will also reap. And so the Apostle Paul goes so far as to say that that to deny, like if you deny that sowing leads to reaping, he says God is so hardwired this into the nature of the universe and the nature of physical reality, spiritual reality, all these things, that if you deny that, it's tantamount to mocking God. Okay? So now, again, don't take my word for it. I want Christians to think about what are other places where we have this same idea of sowing and reaping laid out. Well, how about, you have another verse where Jesus says, God will render to each one according to his works. Okay, so God says there's a relationship between your works and the consequences, like what he will give you as a result of that. Another question would be, why did Jesus have to die on the cross? Why couldn't God just forgive sins?
Yeah. Because there had to be a sacrifice.
Exactly. No,
there
100%.
There had to be a sacrifice for humans' imperfection, and the sacrifice had to be perfect.
Yeah.
Because in the Old Testament, this is one thing that hangs up a lot on Christians or people, even that are Christians I've talked to, like, why don't we do sacrifices anymore? Because before Jesus, all the sacrifices that were done were the most perfect sacrifice we could do. This is why it was the best
Lamb
of whichever animal
goat.
I was in,
exactly.
I was in Israel last December, and it was quite amazing to see some of the infrastructure that's still there today that went to this massive industry of animal sacrifice. It was a huge part of ancient Jewish culture, and you were to sacrifice the most perfect animal you had. You were to sacrifice the best crop you had. And the reason for that is because it was the closest to perfection we had.
Yep.
And then Jesus comes, and he is the perfect sacrifice. That's why he's the Lamb of God. He is the Son of God. He is God.
Yep.
And in sacrificing him, that is the perfect sacrifice that pays our debt, that pays our sins. So ultimately, it's like the ultimate proof of work in a weird way. But yeah,
100%. And so this is why this is such a big deal. And if you, the temptation is to want to trivialize actions and their consequences, right? Like, oh, why couldn't God just forgive sins? Why couldn't he just do that? And that's easy to say if you've never been sinned against. Like, if you've never been grievously sinned against. So imagine someone, murders your entire family. And you hear this from people when, you talk about the idea of, like, could God forgive Hitler? And people have issue with that. Like, they hear that, oh yeah, he could just, confess Jesus as Lord and then he could be saved. People take issue with that. Why? And it's because people want there to be consequences to action. And the reason why they want that is because God programmed us to want that. Like, he's created the world to function in such a way that, there are both good and bad. There's good and bad consequences for action. So if you think about this in a positive way, if we do think about literal sowing and reaping, we think about this with crops. If I plant an orange seed in the ground, what do I get? I don't just get 1-to-1 sowing and reaping. I get exponential sowing and reaping. Or I get sowing and exponential reaping is what you get. And so God has designed sowing and reaping to be this blessing to people. It's this lever that leverages their initial input to get way more output of blessing, and as in a way that God, to the other side, also negatively, everything is exponential. The outputs are exponential. The inputs are whatever the opposite of exponential is.
The fascinating thing about that is that so many people that are not religious, let's say, come to Bitcoin from a physics perspective.
Yes.
And many Christians I know come to Bitcoin from the spiritual perspective. And really what you're saying is like the spiritual side of the physics argument. What you're saying right now is a law of conservation of energy.
Law of conservation of energy, exactly.
It's the exact same thing. You could call it law of conservation of energy. You could call it sowing and reaping. But everything you're talking about, how the exponential nature of physics, the exponential nature of technology, it's all the same thing.
Yes.
And I think there's a beauty in that. And
100%. And this is like what you just expressed, Luke, is fantastic. It's 100% true. And what it demonstrates is like
how undeniable it is.
It's undeniable, and the reality of like there's things that make sense to you because of where you're coming from and what your specialties are, and then there's other people who have different specialties, and God has gifted them differently, or they've studied and are specialized in different things. But this principle is undeniable. All disciplines can acknowledge, this idea and acknowledge the veracity and the reality of, sowing and reaping, conservation of energy, whatever it is. There's no free lunches. This is the point. Is there's no free lunches in God's world, and so this is why Bitcoin is a big deal, because Bitcoin is a money where there's no free lunches. Fiat currency is a system, a monetary system. It's really a credit and debt system where there's free lunches everywhere. Like the government basically, governments and central banks get a free lunch at the expense of their citizens and customers. So.
Yeah, I was actually, when we were recording this, I was just in Boston yesterday. I was in Boston for a Bitcoin related event, stayed there for a while, and I went to the Kennedy campaign announcement just because how often do I get to go to a presidential bid announcement? I knew very little about him.
Yep.
I was walking into it like, oh boy, I don't know what he's going to talk about. I don't know what his talking points are or his policies.
Yep.
But I'm glad I went because everything he talked about he talked about the war in Ukraine. He talked about pollution. He talked about the merging between corporatism and the state. He talked about all these things. I was there for about an hour and a half of his 2-hour speech, and continuing in my mind, what kept coming up is exactly thinking about the point that you're making, that our current form of money is pretending like we can have a free lunch perpetually, exponentially forever. And everything he was saying more or less made exact sense. He was talking again and again and again about how the system is corrupt and about how we need this and how it doesn't make sense and all. And most people, I believe, don't realize that the fundamental reason that so many things feel distorted, that the reason that it seems like the world is not matching up with the reality that there's no free lunch, is because the money at which all those systems are built atop of, the rock at which all these structures are built upon, is a monetary system that is pretending like there are free lunches, that is pretending that you can sow and sow or that you can reap and reap and reap without sowing. I think that a lot of Christians even miss that, and that we think that a certain politician is going to save us, or a certain rule or a certain regulation, or just that we should just throw our hands up and give up. And I think most people don't realize that's the case.
Yeah, 100%, Luke. I honestly, people just take for granted that the way that things are right now are how things have always been. Like, just we have been so gaslit and like Stockholm Syndrome into thinking that what we're experiencing right now is normal and good. Like, this is the nature of Stockholm Syndrome, is that your abusers basically make you think that the abuse is good. Yeah. Like, it's a sick thing, honestly.
I fully agree that there's a certain element of Stockholm Syndrome, especially since the 1970s. The rate of debasement in the United States has, and the rest of the world, to an even larger degree, has increased rapidly. Like, inflation in the 20th century, at least in the United States, was not nearly as bad as it's been so far this century. But I would actually counter that a little bit. I do think that this is normal to a certain extent. And the reason I would say that is because the U.S. dollar is no different. Every other currency, every other form of money in history has been able to be manipulated like that, to where we pretend like there are these free lunches. Sure. Fiat currency obviously is very easy to do that, but even if we take the one that I get pushback with mostly online, gold or silver, let's say, it's still possible to do that, because with gold you can create paper derivatives of gold. And even though you can do that with Bitcoin and everything technically, at the end of the day, gold's analog nature, gold's physical nature inevitably leads to that form of centralization.
100%.
So
I would 100% agree. I think the difference would be, like, there have been periods where there haven't been the paper derivatives, where you still get inflation, you still get monetary debasement, but again, it happens a lot slower, and so you get periods. You have periods where the currency is more stable, where again you still could have 100 other things go wrong, but at least like that's the danger of this, is like the monetary stuff does affect so much. Like it really does, just it touches everything, especially in the latter stages of currency debasement. But there's still a whole lot that can go wrong, even if you have hard money. That's great, like due to human corruption is still affects a lot of other things too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the way I've been putting it, I don't know if you heard me put this before or not, but I think this would really resonate with Christians. This is a different, well, not even Christians necessarily, just even those that aren't Christians, so to speak, I think would appreciate this. But the way I've put it is that all humans are corrupt. All humans are imperfect. All humans have imperfect wills. You mentioned like Hitler earlier, for example. I think oftentimes you like to think that we're bad, but then there are the really bad people.
Yep.
And the problem with that, and the problem that Jesus says about that, is that there's no, if you're imperfect, you're imperfect.
Yep.
There's a little bit of Hitler inside all of us,
Yep.
as a song I like goes. And
Yep.
anyway, point being that all of us fall short of the glory of God, or all of us fall short of perfection.
Yep.
And ultimately, if money is this technology at which we price all of the technologies within, and it has to rely on sowing and reaping and not just reaping, well, if you have a system that has an exploit that, this is in computer science jargon, this would be like the double spend problem, or you could, in the biblical sense, you could call it sowing and reaping, or breaking law of conservation of energy from a physics perspective. It's all the same thing. Sowing, reaping, double spend, law of conservation of energy. If you find a way at which that can be exploited, eventually you'll get a human or a group of humans that will exploit that and distort it from reality. And as soon as that happens, the whole thing becomes worthless because it's no longer in congruence with reality. So up to this point, we've had those exploits consistently. And I would argue that the importance of Bitcoin, the relevance of Bitcoin, is that for the first time in human history, we have found a way that might, and I would argue is almost certain, to detach, to close off that failure point.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, the case is very strong for that. I think it's only getting stronger, and the implications of that on society are massive, because so much of the corruption, like the political rally I was talking about yesterday, the whole talk was about this corruption or whatever, mostly just in the last couple of years. And that the corruption in the last couple of years has been worse than the couple of years before, and the corruption in the next couple of years are probably worse than what we see today. And that's the loving of one's neighbor. That's the building a better world that I think many Christians don't realize, is that this is not about the number going up. This is not about Bitcoin becoming more valuable. That's actually not what's important. The important thing is that it decouples the mathematical formula that must obey sowing and reaping from human nature being able to exploit that for its own short-term benefit, which, as an inevitable result, means that its value goes up indefinitely.
Yeah. And again, that is a huge part of it. Is again, this is what I basically say is, like, honestly, the great lie, the bigger lie that humans have been dealing with since the very beginning, is the lie that limitations, or that anything that limits us is bad. Like that's literally, I mean, that's what happens in Genesis 3 is the serpent convinces humanity, Adam and Eve, that this limitation that God has put on them is designed to rain on their parade and keep good things from them. And so this is repeated over and over again. And you're like, what does that have to do with fiat currency? Well, literally, the big lie was not in 1971. 1970, the seeds of 1971 were planted in 1913 with the Federal Reserve, because it was the Jekyll Island conspiracy.
Yeah.
Exactly. So So the Jekyll Island conspiracy in 1913 is basically to say that we as government officials can create money out of thin air. Like that is the lie, that humans can create value out of thin air and not through a process of sowing and reaping. That is the big lie. That, again, this is what the serpent fed Adam and Eve, is that you can be like gods. You can not only can you be like God, knowing good and evil, because that's not actually the lie. They actually did become like God, and God says as much. God says they become like us, knowing good and evil. So Satan, the lie wasn't that. The lie was a qualitative lie. It was a lie about that being a good thing. And so you have basically, because it's like, you're like, I always use I love the it's from one of the Avengers movies. They have who's his name, the green guy,
the Hulk.
The Hulk, where he said, he slams the guy and he's like, puny gods. Like, this is we're just not suited to be God. Like we're just not suited to be him. We don't have the control. We don't have the strength. We're not omniscient. All these things. We're just not geared towards it. But we are tempted to believe and drawn towards the temptation to believe and to act on the idea that we could become like God, and throw off any limitation that we have that would keep us from doing what we want.
Yeah, even deeper than that. I think what you're saying in effect is true, but I think also the cause is true. I think in the action of printing money, aka in the action of saying we can break the laws of physics, is in many ways similar to that of the fruit in the Garden of Eden. Is that
Yep.
in the way that we take the fruit and saying, I don't need God, I can surpass, I
Yep.
can, I can be in charge.
Yep.
It's like saying, well, I can break the laws of physics. I can no longer be in
Yes.
conjunction with reality. We
Yes.
can just make value out of thin air.
Yep.
If God can make something out of nothing
Yep.
in Genesis, then surely
Yes.
I can make value out of nothing.
Yes.
And it's amazing how pervasive these myths are in society, that inflation is good. I mean, a certain extent of inflation. It's like, well, what
Yes.
rate of theft is tolerable? What rate of
Exactly.
insanity is tolerable? What rate of picking the fruit is intolerable? Like, there is no example in human history where putting numbers on pieces of paper gives
Yeah.
people more wealth,
100%.
because it
Yeah.
doesn't. You have to put in the work, you have to put in the energy,
Yep.
a brute force physical cost energy
Yep.
expenditure in order to gain prosperity, in order to gain wealth. And then you denominate that within the money. The printing
Yep.
of the money causes no wealth. It's always inherently 100% theft.
Yeah.
And I think that's really worth hammering home. I don't know if you want to speak to that,
It
but that's
is.
something I
No.
really like to remind people. That's not a political, or that's not a buzz phrase. That's not a
Yes.
buzzword. It's
It's
a
not a.
literal.
It's
Yeah.
not neutral. Like that's the idea. Is like we these ideas just get so normalized. Oh, 2% inflation. Like this is just what we just what we have to have. And when you think about that, you're like, so what you're actually saying is that you're okay stealing. Your target is to steal 2%. It's actually way more than that, but your target is to steal 2% every year. The math. The math gifted among us. Start to do the math, and they're like, wait a second. So that means in like 50 years, at minimum, like you're gonna be stealing 100% of our buying power, or and like this. So when you actually start thinking about the consequences of it, it doesn't make any sense. But again, and this is why I wouldn't say I'm dubious about Bitcoin's future. Obviously, I'm doing what I'm doing, but the reality is that the temptation is always to throw off, is always to give to someone else the responsibility that God gives to us. It's so tempting to just want to just say, hey, I
That's
don't
good.
want to think about that. That's hard. Why don't I'll pay you a fee to do it for me? And that happens when that starts to happen on all kinds of levels. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, you start thinking about, okay, so you start thinking about this in relation to money. Like, this is what banks were, and like you could forgive people for doing that, with as relates to gold and silver because of its physical limitations. But then you start thinking about other areas. You start thinking about governance. Okay, you start thinking about churches. In Christian circles. So how much of the problems that we are seeing is a result of you have people who are outsourcing the education of their children, whether that that's their actual education to government schools, where the government is setting the curriculum for what they're going to teach, and they're shaping how their children think about reality. You think about this in relation to churches. You have, again, I'll be real honest. This might be a controversial opinion, but like the idea of youth groups, not a great idea. When you look at the fruit, I know in my own life, youth groups, like, hey, here I am. I'm in this, delayed adolescence. I'm not with the body of Christ. Here I am off in this group by myself. I'm with all people my own age. This is not a fruitful place. But again, we just outsource the responsibility rather than, a church, for example, training parents to disciple their kids well. The parents just go, hey, I'm going to drop them off. I've had them all week, and they're going to be taught here on Wednesday night or for Sunday school, if your church does that. So this plague of wanting to, shirk responsibility and shirk stewardship, to use a Christian word, is I understand it. I have fallen into it. I get it. But those are seeds that you can't sow without reaping the consequences. What are you laughing about, Luke? Tell me.
I have so much to say about what you just um you're getting brutal, but brutally honest. I love it because
Yep.
I actually agree with you. I'm glad you said that. I think so much of I think so much of our problem today is that we defer responsibility again, again,
Yep.
again, again.
Yep.
I do actually think that colleges and youth groups oftentimes are that. Not
Yep.
that they're inherently wrong, not that they're always bad,
Yep.
but I do think many people um, just assume that everything will
Yep.
work out fine. Like,
Yep.
it'll be fine. And I think that's a real problem. And I think, you mentioned managers. I think it's the same true. The same thing is true with financial portfolios and retirement. We don't want to learn about investing. We don't want to learn
Yep.
about our money. Instead, we will trust one person with our entire retirement portfolio.
Yes. Yep.
We would rather do that than think about money. And it's like I say this to people all the time. It's like, okay, let's say you have a 40-year working career. You include your school, include off hours. It's like, okay, you'll spend 100,000 hours of your life working and working for money, and you put it in one spot and have one person manage it. And it's like they won't consider, like, does inflation even make sense? Does money even make sense? They won't even give that an hour of thought or 10 hours
Yep.
of thought or
Yep.
100 hours of thought.
Yep.
Even 1,000 hours of thought makes sense.
Yep.
People think it's strange that I spend so much time thinking about Bitcoin, talking about Bitcoin. It's like, well, even if I spend 1,000 hours on the subject, that's still only 1% of my working career. So it's
Yep.
like, you know, like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's not a big deal. But anyway, all that to say, just to come back to what you were saying, is that I think that's incredibly true. That we like to defer responsibility. We don't want to bear the cross
Yep.
like Jesus did. We don't want to take that responsibility. We'd rather someone else do it for us.
100%.
And
Yep.
I think ultimately and this is going to really attack people, but I think that's ultimately the biggest reason why people don't want to learn about Bitcoin. And it's ultimately the biggest reason why people don't want to learn about Jesus.
Yep.
People don't want to learn about Jesus because they don't want to admit, I'm sinful, I'm in need of a savior. And likewise, people don't want to admit Bitcoin is a superior form of money in the world because it is an admission, an inherent
Yep.
admission that nobody can be this God King.
Yep.
Nobody can break the laws of it. Nobody can do this
Yep.
better than just perfect
Yep.
zero,
Yep.
like than just math. Like for me, that was a big moment that I really understood Bitcoin. That's the moment I point to the most, is that I understood Bitcoin's significance when I understood nobody on the planet could figure this out, even me.
Yep.
And that's not to make much of me. That's just to say that
Yep.
nobody can do it. Nobody can bear the responsibility of breaking the laws of physics.
Yep.
Like nobody can do that.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people spend a lot of time debating what's Jerome Powell going to do next. What's the money
Yep.
supply going to do next? What's going to happen? And like again and again and again, I try to educate people. Is just that Jerome Powell has no good option.
Yep.
And people that say burn the Fed down or
Yep.
whatever, it's like yes, sure,
Yep.
but the problem is not Jerome Powell. The problem are not the people in the Fed. The problem is that you can't solve that. You
Yep.
can't do it, and then once you've done it, you can't solve it
Okay.
without
Yep.
having catastrophe. And
Yep.
and I think our society, in the monetary level, and then all the other levels that are built atop the monetary level,
Yep.
are just deferring that responsibility and
Yep.
assuming it's going to work out. And I
Yep.
think that risk happens fast, and I think
Yep.
people are going to realize really quickly that only those that are sowing are going to. I
Yeah.
made my point. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think again the irony, right, is that everybody wants to believe. We all want a savior, right? Like everyone they're like, "Oh, Jerome Powell is going to make a decision and that's going to again, he like what is going on? Like if you asked any ancient person who lived longer ago than 5 minutes, they watch the ritual that happens every however many weeks that Jerome Powell comes out. Like he is like the secular monetary pope is literally what he like. That's how he's treated. I mean, he has
Yep.
that kind of like people looked at him and like, I
Yeah.
mean, his
He
decisions
is.
have incredible
Yeah.
consequences throughout our world. Like it's insane.
He is. I say this, and I get flack for it sometimes from the traditional finance folks, where it's like Jerome Powell is, I would argue, the most powerful person in the world with like the lowest cost of changing the world. So it's like, yeah,
100%.
obviously Putin or Biden or whoever could
Yeah.
nuke a bunch of cities. Yeah,
Yeah.
obviously, I'm not stupid. Maybe
Yep.
I am. I don't know. But Jerome Powell, single-handedly, if he just miss says some things, or if he just has a bad, day,
Yeah.
or
Some
is
bad tacos,
grumpy or
whatever.
whatever,
Yeah.
yeah, there are other members at the Fed, but it's like if he comes out on that podium and does one, two, or three critical mistakes,
Yeah.
it's in his presentation, it's like, okay, there goes a bank, or there goes a series of banks.
Yeah.
I mean, like, if they hadn't bailed out, anyway, I made my point.
No,
But yeah,
I
it's basically a cult.
yes, and this is a bigger thing, right? Like this is so because so much of this comes down to authority. Like so much of this comes down to like where does Jerome Powell get authority from? Where does the Federal Reserve, which is neither federal nor has any reserves, like where does it get its authority from? And how like legitimate is that authority? Like these are the
Yeah,
questions where,
it gets its authority from society. That's
yeah,
the only authority. The Federal Reserve's only authority is that society has collectively said, we are willing for you to steal from us. Like that's another
yeah,
thought that hit me at the Kennedy rally yesterday, was that all these people here cheering on Kennedy, and,
yeah,
and likewise with Trump, or likewise with Biden, all these people cheer on all these candidates,
yeah,
and yet, the Bitcoiners know nobody really wants him to succeed.
yeah,
Nobody really wants Trump to drain the
yep,
swamp. Nobody really wants Kennedy to do all these wonderful reforms that he talks about. Nobody really wants Biden to bring normalcy, because
mhm,
if if we have a society that is built on lies and corruption, where the underlying communication system of value, the money, is lies and corruption, nobody really wants to fix the problems, because that requires that fundamental thing to be fixed
yep,
first and foremost before we can fix everything else. And so everything else is theater until we fix the money. All these other things are theater,
yep,
and ultimately nobody wants to fix the money,
yep,
because none of
yeah.
us want to humble ourselves.
Well, and again, as long as we're offending people, Luke, we might as well just try to offend as many people as possible. I mean,
Yeah,
like
let's go for it.
one of the things, again, just talking about the nature of money. Like money can be two things, right? It can either be something that you sowed and reaped for. So like you either front load the work involved to produce money, or you backload it.
Yeah,
So you can either do the work beforehand of like digging up gold and silver, digging it up, processing it, doing all that, and then you get a product at the end of the day.
yeah,
Or
yeah,
you can just create it up front, and then and then basically people functionally it's a
yeah,
system of debt and credit. Um,
yeah.
so it's one or the other. And again, I've talked to a lot of Christians. I've grown up around Christians, all these things, and when you when there's the New Testament especially is pretty clear about the danger of debt. I mean, again,
Yeah.
I have a lot of people who take the Bible very seriously, but like there's when the Apostle Paul says, "Owe no man anything," and like you're like, okay, there's no this is pretty straightforward. We don't need a lot of Hebrew and Greek analysis of that. It's pretty straightforward what that means. And yet it's incredible the level of comfort that we have, and that Christians, who are the largest demographic group in the United States, the level of comfort that we have with large amounts of debt. And again, whether I understand it for buying houses, I understand like it's in many cases for a lot of people it's the only way they're going to be able to buy a house. I agree. All these things, but again, you're getting comfortable with something that basically fiat currency normalizes something that God in the Bible says that we are to avoid. And so I
Because
think
it
that
has to.
what
Yeah,
would you say?
because it has to.
Yeah, and so this is the thing is, and so but there's plenty of things, and this is where I look at like what is the role, like what is our role in this thing, like how do I think about like what are the historical examples of something similar that happened like this? Okay, so you have I would just use something this again. I would use something like the African slave trade. Okay, here's an example of something the British Empire was largely economically enriched through the slave trade. I mean, they were incentivized monetarily in order to keep this going. And you had this guy, again, it wasn't just him, but he was one of the larger ones, William Wilberforce, who basically says, has this encounter with God. He's basically like, convicted about slavery, about the British Empire, this quote unquote Christian nation being built off the backs of the lie that black people are subservient to white people, basically. Like this is at least part of what was going on. And
The
so
lie that white people can reap without sowing.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And how do you justify that? Well, these are lesser than people. These people aren't actually in God's image. There's differences there, and so you have this idea of you have this thing that had been totally normalized within most of England. This idea that we benefit from free labor from these people over here, and it seems like if somebody steps up and says, "Hey, we're going to stop this," people are like, "Hey, like, what are you doing? Think of all the time that's going to take you. Like, you could be making disciples. If you're a Christian, you could be doing all these other things." And Wilberforce just goes, "This is wrong. Like, it doesn't matter like how hard this is going to be to do. This is wrong, and so we can't just let it happen." And so I think something very similar with Bitcoin and with fiat currency. Fiat currency is theft. Like, it's flat out theft, and there's no way around that. It is what it is. And so we can do one of two things. We can either say, we're just going to be okay with theft, and we're going to be okay with debt that cripples churches and cripples, their ability to, like, actually serve their populations, because they become beholden towards paying these giant mortgages for these giant buildings. We're either going to do that, we're going to stay comfortable with that and die, or we're going to start saying, hey, we were wrong. We were wrong to normalize and to be lulled to sleep by these things that have been normalized by a culture that doesn't, bow to Jesus. But as for us, we're going to bow to Jesus, and we're going to start taking issue with things that Jesus has said he takes issue with, one of them being debt.
Yeah.
And so Bitcoin is, again, there it's not that you avoid debt altogether, but to have a monetary system that is debt is insane.
The way I've put it before is that when you corrupt the money, you corrupt the incentives, and when you corrupt the incentives, you corrupt the society. So whether debt is always wrong to take out, I don't think it's always wrong to take out. I've had good experiences with debt and bad experiences with debt. But when it comes to that, what you're pointing at is that exact feedback loop. And I think most churches in the next 5 to 15 years, let's say, probably closer to 5, is they're going to realize that almost all of their resources are fighting an uphill battle against this exact thing that we're talking about. I'm speaking to the churches and pastors specifically here, is that, most of your church's budget is going to paying expenses and debt payments of a monetary system that is inherently requiring excessively increasing amounts of debt, because we are printing money out of thin air and justifying it by borrowing it towards ourselves with new yield. So when you create money and you have a new yield with that you have to, you're reaping and reaping with a little bit of sowing on top of that. You inherently increase the need for future reaping, and it's a Ponzi scheme essentially. And so
it is 100% a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, and it is very frustrating to me that most churches, although I understand why they don't understand what's going on, most churches are completely oblivious that the majority of their offerings, that the majority of their budgets are going to that. And furthermore, the majority of their missions work and the majority of their outreach is alleviating the symptoms of problems, which in most cases entirely, and in some cases not entirely, are a result of a corrupted monetary layer. I'd like to take a brief moment and talk about the Bitcoin social layer, because today's sponsor of this podcast is the Orange Pill app. And the Orange Pill app is advancing and building that Bitcoin social layer as I speak here. In fact, I'm on the Orange Pill app. I joined it a couple months ago, and there are other Bitcoiners and plebs on there too. People like Safety and a Moose, Natalie Brunell, Nate Savenholm, Daniel Prince, BTC Sessions, and other Bitcoiners and plebs are on there too and joining all the time. And so the social layer is really important, because while online connections are essential and they're needed and a critical piece of bringing Bitcoin mass adoption, in real life connections are only going to become more and more important into the future, and a larger catalyst for being Bitcoin's circular economy and for Bitcoin's adoption. And so with the Orange Pill app, you can find Bitcoiners near you so that you can make those in-person Bitcoin connections and those Bitcoin friends. And one of the cool features is that you don't just find people near you, but also you can find Bitcoiners when you travel somewhere. So like recently, for example, I went to Boston, and now I'm going to Miami here soon. And I'm glad to say that I've met Bitcoiners through the Orange Pill app directly, and also indirectly through people I met through the Orange Pill app. So it's been something that's been useful to me personally. And so if you're going to be on the road too, you might be able to find Bitcoiners from where you're headed even before you get there. So, and additionally, Orange Pill app not only gives you people to meet, but it's also the world's largest repository for Bitcoin only events. So you might be able to find cool places to hang out and not just Bitcoiners alone. So we all know that social networks and network effects have value. And so everyone that is joining the Orange Pill app makes it only stronger and stronger into the future. So I would consider joining the Orange Pill app today and get one step closer to mass adoption and expanding your Bitcoin network. So Orange Pill app is available on Android, iOS. For your consideration, appreciate your time. Let's get back to the show.
Agreed. And this is where, like, praise God. There's still, like, the fact that there's people who are giving to missions, fantastic. Like that, they're still, like, they're honoring God. We're not trying to minimize that at all. But what we're saying is, like, with every day that goes by, literally, with every day that goes by, the money that people within these churches and, just within churches, organizations, whatever, the money that they're waking up, choosing to obey God and go out and work rather than just stay home and get a check from the government in the mail. Like, they're choosing to deny themselves and serve other people. And with every day that goes by, that money, the fruit of their denial of self to serve other people, accomplishes less and less and less. And so this was a big part of when we were in Uruguay. We saw this firsthand of there are very few churches in Uruguay that can afford to pay their pastors a full-time salary, which means that those pastors have to go out and try to find a second job. But even then, the second job, with enough years go by, and then the second job's not enough, and so they need to get a third job. And maybe that means that they have to send their kids to public school. Maybe that means that they have to do, like, it's over time. It's just this slow moving, bulldozer that just prevents, it affects churches' and other Christians' abilities, to do things that actually serve in the interests of their neighbor.
Yeah, and can I make something very clear here? For those that perhaps are still listening, don't understand. Okay, I want to emphasize that sometimes I'm called an optimist, other times called a pessimist, but I'm going to be called a pessimist for this. But I have to emphasize, it has to get worse. The rate at which we print money has to increase because of yields, because of everything I mentioned before. Okay, money's information. And if we are distorting the fundamental informational layer of society, the misinformation has to get worse. Okay. Churches, I've been in the back end of churches. I've seen a lot of organizations. Okay, the distortion of the inefficiencies and the distortions and the lies in organizations, Christian organizations, secular organizations, and charities. Okay, that has to get worse. All of these inefficiencies, all of this corruption, all of this chaos is going to get worse in the next 5 years than it has been the last 5 years. The 5 years after that, it will continue to get worse. So you gave the metaphor of a bulldozer. I would say it's a bulldozer pushing a snowball up a hill. And the harder you push, the larger that snowball gets, the more surface area is going to get, the more volume is going to get, the more difficult it's going to be. And so I have to emphasize that it's like, if you think your church is suffering, if you think your missions work is suffering right now, if budgets feel tight, it has to be emphasized that if you are within a monetary system that's designed to get worse, it is inevitable that whatever struggle you're facing right now, maybe your budget is not keeping up with expenses, maybe you're having trouble fighting, whatever the case is, it's going to get worse unless we solve that societal problem. And that's not to say that God or the church needs a perfect utopia in order to serve people. Obviously, the church has thrived in difficulty before. 100%. However, the Bitcoiners are here saying that, if you think censorship is bad now, if you think polarization is bad now, what happens when a CBDC comes and your church is not allowed to contribute to X, Y, or Z cause because it's international and we don't want to do that, or because it's in exchange for these goods and services and we don't want to do that because there's a shortage, or maybe your religious organization has, a cap that you can't have this tax deduction anymore. You can't have this because we don't. You're hateful or whatever. People. I love Christians. I love pastors, but I really think they don't read enough history. And I don't think they read enough monetary history. And I don't think they realize that the hard times we are in right now are the good times of the next 20 years. From 2023 to 2043, right now is probably the easiest time that churches will have.
Yeah, and you're 100% right. Again, and this is the same thing. I would 100% agree as far as the historical element. Again, history is another form of submitting to sowing and reaping, like acting, like acknowledging the fact that you're not the first people to live. Like, you're not the first person to experience this. There's been other people who made similar decisions in the past and who reaped the consequences of those decisions. And so I just wanted to read. So there's you're talking about more pastors need to understand this. Again, I come from more of like a Reformed like tradition, like Southern Baptist. I'm sorry, not Southern Baptist, Reformed Baptist, and like Presbyterian PCA. Like I read
didn't
a
know
lot
that.
of those guys.
That's okay.
So I read a lot of those guys, and so one of the things I'm like, I just found out. I was talking to this guy. I did a podcast interview with a guy, Brandon. I can't remember his last name right now, but Brandon works at Westminster Theological Seminary, and he was working. He was in the library, and he found they have there's a philosopher, a theologian named Cornelius Van Til, and they have like a bunch of his personal library, his personal books in there. And so one of the books that they had was his copy. He has a copy of Human Action by Mises. And so this guy, Brandon, was like, "Oh my gosh!" He was just freaking out over the fact that Mises had these, what today would be radical libertarian, or I mean, Van Til had these, this theologian respected by all these people, had this radical, libertarian economist's work in his thing in his library. But the other thing that he said, he'd been reading some by J. Gresham Machen, who is he was actually the founder of the Orthodox Presbyterian Church. He was in the PCA for a long time, but he was a pastor. He was a preaching pastor at a church where Woodrow Wilson was a deacon in the church. And so again, Woodrow Wilson is famously, the Federal Reserve. He was the president when the Federal Reserve was established.
He is my least favorite president in American history.
With good reason.
Even the Federal Reserve aside, he set us up. Yeah, he was really, really
exactly.
bad.
And so J. Gresham Machen objected strongly to the establishment of the Federal Reserve. But one of the other things, let me find this real quick. The other thing, he also objected to Executive Order 6102.
Oh.
And so we have actually a document. I don't know if it was a sermon or just something, but he wrote this about Executive Order 6102. Okay, this is written. You can imagine now that was Executive 6102. What year was that? It was like 20, or was it 34, 39, something? I can't remember what year it was.
Yeah, no.
But thereabouts. Okay, this was written almost 100 years ago. 85, 90 years ago. He said, "I think the really significant thing that we find is that America has turned away from God. In the political and social discussions of the day, God's law has ceased to be regarded as a factor that deserves be reckoned with at all. That is true with regard to the higher ranges of human life. It's also true in regard to that mammon in which our Lord said a man must be faithful if he is to be faithful in higher things. We hear much about mammon today. We hear much about the currency. We hear much about the question whether what is euphemistically called a managed currency is or is not economically more advantageous than the gold standard. But the sad thing is that in all this discussion, we hear little about simple honesty, which is the law of God. I can remember when I had a certain patriotic pride in the good faith of the United States government, in those bygone days when the phrase sound as a dollar had not yet become a jest. The United States government, in its business dealings, seemed to me to be the very embodiment of integrity. I regarded it as almost inconceivable that it would repudiate its corporate obligations. Yet today it has done just that. Of course, there are times when a government or an individual must fail to meet obligations. That is when the government or the individual is bankrupt, when the government or the individual acknowledges the justice of the obligations but is under the necessity of pleading that they cannot be met. I'm not saying, therefore, that when a country goes off of a gold standard, it is necessarily acting dishonestly, but it is not such an honest bankruptcy which we have in the United States at the present time. On the contrary, what we have is a very ruthless application of the devil's principle that might makes right. Look at the United States gold certificate, if you can find one somewhere in a museum today without being put in jail for looking at it. Upon it, the United States government promises to pay very specifically, not in some other currency, but in gold. It is a solemn obligation of the United States. It's a solemn contract, not of any individual, but of the United States government, a contract to the fulfillment of which the honor of the American people is pledged, a contract with the holder of the note. Today, not only is that contract not fulfilled, but the holder of the contract is threatened with imprisonment unless he hands over to the defaulting party the contract itself. I tell you, my friends, and this is the end, I tell you, my friends, there are many things that are uncertain about the future, but of one we can be sure. A nation that tramples thus upon the law of God, that tramples upon the basic principles of integrity, is headed for destruction unless it repents in time. Is that not the most ballin' thing you've ever heard? I read that and I was like, oh my word. Would that we had more pastors who understood like the consequences of and the spiritual reality of what it was to set aside, the gold standard. It just is phenomenal.
Well, I think they will eventually. It's just a matter of will they before or after the tipping point.
Yep. No, 100%.
Yeah.
And so again, and I agree with you. And I'll say this as far as again, just the way that the Lord used the situation with so again, half of our church in Uruguay were Venezuelans. And we had, again, despite the injustice of, the hyperinflation that they suffered, I remember very specifically there's a dear woman, her name is Zulema. And Zulema, she basically grew up in a Roman Catholic household, and she basically said, God had to bring me away from my whole family for me to, and to basically bring me to poverty for me to recognize my need of him. I was too comfortable basically in Venezuela. And so again, I think to your point earlier, I think that God, is going to use, whether people wake up in time or not, God's going to use it. He's going to use that. I can totally see him using the suffering as a result of this for good in any event. I think that's not in debate. I think, again, the thing that, and this is why I want to emphasize this point is, regardless of what the outcome is, Christians, we're not utilitarians. Like, we're not sitting here just trying to avoid suffering. We're sitting here holding up, this is wrong. Like denying the reality of, upon which God has created the world, this principle, denying this principle of sowing and reaping, denying the reality that, or putting forth the idea that we can just create reality out of thin air is a lie. And so we want to resist it for that reason, not because we're going to get rich through getting Bitcoin, not because we don't want to suffer. No, it's got to do with we want to use a currency and live in such a way as we acknowledge God's rightful lordship over the world, and we live in such a way that acknowledges and treats our neighbors as the same. It treats our neighbors the way that we would want to be treated, and doesn't prey upon the poor and the weak the way that the existing system does.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it. I've never been in Venezuela, but I was in Guatemala a couple months ago in February, and we were installing stoves, which may not sound like a big deal to us spoiled fat Americans, but it's a big deal to them. And it was very painful for me to know that 8, 10, 12% of their wealth is being stolen every year, which for them is not a lot. If they have maybe a shack, or what we would call a shack, that's not to be disrespectful to them, but if they have a place like that, they had maybe a motorcycle and maybe a couple, smartphones, not iPhones, but a couple, it's like, they have, what, $5,000-$10,000 of possessions, including the land, and being really generous there, and yet they're having 10% of their wealth stolen every year just by an accounting error that we are forcefully doing because we don't like to deal with reality, because we want to keep everything going up forever, and because we just want to deal with our own world. And so I think, to your point about being utilitarian and it not just being about solving the world's problems and making the world a better place, but it's been really amazing to me. And this is something that's really caught me by surprise, pleasant surprise, over the last few months on Twitter, was just the amount of messages I've gotten from people saying that, I'm so glad you're talking about Bitcoin. I'm so glad you're Christian. I know earlier I said that most people are critical of me talking about the other, but I think it is not only imperative for churches to understand Bitcoin from preserving their own balance sheets and from having more effective mission work and preventing censorship that's inevitably coming in the
Yep.
future. But
100%.
I
Yep.
think it's also such a clear gospel opportunity, and I
Oh
think
yeah.
most Christians don't realize that.
Yep.
Because what happens when a person understands Bitcoin are a couple things. They understand oftentimes for the first time that there's no human that can do this, that
Yep.
all humans are flawed. And so for the first time, there are many people that are realizing, wait, I'm not perfect
Yep.
and I cannot do this.
Yep.
And then they're realizing, wait, my whole life I've been working for a form of money that is a lie. What else in my life is a lie? What else am
Yeah.
I believing
Yeah.
that is not so? And this
Yes.
is the whole waking up from the Matrix
Yep.
quote. But it's like,
Yep.
and then additionally to that, they're learning responsibility because
Yep.
their entire life they've been deferring responsibility. Now they want responsibility. So it's like, if we're right, and in the
Yep.
next 5, 10, 15 years, we are going to have a stupendous number of people that are going to wake up and realize, I'm not perfect. I've been deferring responsibility. I need to take responsibility. And I have just witnessed how delusional I have been in believing fiat lies my
Yep.
whole life.
Yep.
And in that state, it's like almost you almost can't think of a better circumstance
Yep.
for somebody to be open to the gospel. And I don't say that lightly. I think that's
Yep.
literally true
Yep. Yep.
because their entire life they have been working for a form of value because that's what money is. Money or the love of money,
Yep.
is the love of that at which can acquire anything of this material world. And
Yep.
so for them waking up for the first time in their life and realizing, wait a second, my whole life I've been working for something that I valued, and now my whole value paradigm is shifting. Like you're saying about worldviews earlier, it's like
Yep.
these are the perfect people to minister to, and it is
Yep.
so moving to me
Yep.
when I get messages from people saying that I was a lukewarm Christian and now I
Yep.
actually believe and I'm actually saved because Bitcoin was an inciting
Yep.
moment for me to wake
Yep.
up and realize my own inadequacies.
Yep.
Or for other people, they say I was formerly an atheist. I'm not a Christian, but I'm more open to it.
Yep.
It's really amazing, and I'm sure there are people that have gone from Christian to atheist because of Bitcoin. Yeah, I'm sure
Yep.
there are, just from
Yep.
statistical probability. But I've not met yet one, and
Yeah.
I've met dozens and dozens of people that
On
it's
the other
been.
side of the fence. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I really hope Christians and missionaries realize that not just from a oh you got to save your money, not just from a materialistic perspective, not
Yep.
just from look at the opportunity, blah blah blah, but you never go up, but from
Yep.
an evangelistic perspective, and that's
Yep.
something that I really enjoy being in the space and talking to people with.
No.
So yeah,
100%. And I think again when I you just think about again you think about the sowing and reaping, right? We didn't get into the situation we're in overnight, and so we're not going to get out of it overnight. And so like, I get these questions from I get messages from people who I've talked to about Bitcoin. They'll go, oh, Bitcoin went down. It's like, okay, the number going up is not the point. Like that's going to happen, but that's a byproduct of the fact that more and more people are using it,
yeah,
and more people are finding it useful for utilities that actually people need.
well,
And
well,
so yeah,
uh-huh. Well, I think what's so difficult for people is that they're used to thinking the values of assets within that fiat regime. Because I mean, think about what fiat is. You're creating more and more money, and that money's going to find the place that's the most monetizable. Typically, that's real estate, bonds, and stocks. It
yep,
flows to those places. And
yep,
so, for you to pick the right stock or the right real estate
yes,
market, you're basically
yes,
outsmarting the rest of that market that's competing for the funnel of money. And
yep,
so, a Bitcoiner comes along and says Bitcoin's going to $100 million, and they're like, what?
yeah, yeah,
Because it makes no sense to them. And well, there are many reasons why it
yep,
doesn't make sense to them from a technological standpoint, from a monetary, there's
yep,
so many reasons that we can't get into. But I think one of those is that they don't understand that when you have a corrupt ledger, you have to be smarter than everyone else to predict
yes,
where is that money going to funnel.
yep,
But
yep,
if you just have another ledger that doesn't have that corruption, well, its value in relation to the to the corruptible thing is infinitely more.
yep,
Like this goes back, I've said the physics example in other shows. I'll say it again here real quick, just for those that haven't heard it before. But it's like, what is the price of a plane that flies in terms of planes that don't fly? Like,
yeah,
if you're trying to get across the Atlantic
yep,
Ocean, what do you want? 10 planes that don't
yep,
fly versus one that does? Do you want 1,000 planes? Do you want 1,000,000 planes?
yep,
It's like no. Like you want the plane that flies. Same thing with the ship. You don't want. Most people. They're like, how do you pick the ship that sinks the slowest? Because you
yep,
have a million ships that are all sinking. All these stocks and pension
yep,
funds and 401ks and
yep,
bonds, especially, are really big
yep,
sinking ship. All these things are sinking at different rates, and they're like, wow, you're really bold to be saying this ship is going to sink the slowest. And it's like, No, it's just that this one ship doesn't sink because
Yep.
it's the only monetary standard in human history
Yep.
that does not have this hole,
Yep.
this hole in its hole
Yep.
that is being exploited by reaping and reaping without sowing. And so
Yep.
that's what I think that's the fascinating part. And the irony is that it actually makes you more bullish. There are people that don't yet understand Bitcoin that think it's going to $1 million, that it's
Yep.
going to $500,000
Yep.
or even more. And and it's like they don't get it.
Yeah.
And that's what people don't realize, that there's the world, there are the Bitcoiners, people that own Bitcoin. Well, there are Bitcoin owners, I should
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there are the Bitcoiners, which are the smallest circle.
Yep.
And this circle is a lot bigger than the small circle.
Yep.
And ultimately the difference is that the people in the outer small circle
Yep.
still view Bitcoin as having value within and they still view an uncorruptible ledger as having value within a corrupted ledger.
Yes.
And it's like I tweeted it this morning. Either Bitcoin works or it doesn't.
Yep.
If it does not work, it's going to zero. Satoshi
Yep.
said this in
Yep.
2010.
Yep.
House said this in
100%.
2009. House said Bitcoin's going to either 0 or 10 million, and that's 26 million adjusted for inflation
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Like,
Exactly.
like the people at the very beginning, years before Bitcoin was trading for even a single cent,
Yep.
these people understood either it's going to be like every other engineering system, like a car or a plane or a ship or a light bulb, an electrical system. Either it's going to be closed or it's going to be open. Either it's going to work or it doesn't. It's binary, 1 or 0.
Yes.
And and to emphasize for Christians, the fact that it's above, and anyone else for that matter, the fact that it's not at 0 after 14 years,
Yep.
and nobody has found a way to corrupt it. Nobody's found a way to stop it. Vladimir Putin has tried. The Taliban has tried. The Communist Chinese
Yep.
Party has
China.
tried. Yeah. But multiple times they've tried, and they've failed every single
Yep.
time. Within a matter of months, it comes back, roaring back to life, better. And it only gets more and more difficult to stop the larger it grows, just because that's how it's
Yep.
designed to do. And and it's going to be a really rude awakening for people because most people are still in that mindset where they have that unit bias. Like, no
Yep.
way Bitcoin will get to $3 million because that's 100x.
Yeah.
100x from $30,000. There's no way.
Yep.
It's like,
There's
but
1% of the world using it, but sure. Yeah.
yeah. But it's like that. I was telling someone in Boston that
Yep.
it's like they and they were a Bitcoiner and
Yep.
they were one of the leaders of this meetup and I was trying to explain to them. It's like, you realize Bitcoin will be $10 million, and 90% of society still does
Won't
not
believe it.
understand
And
Bitcoin.
they'll think they're too late and they
And,
won't
and,
buy
and
it.
and
Yeah.
they're like, yeah, 10 million. I was like, no, think about it. Do the math. There's 2 million coins left. They're $30,000 each. You get 1 billion. Anyway, I don't have to get into the math. I'm getting on a rant now, but it's like,
Yep.
I really want to emphasize that to people, that I talk about how Bitcoin's going up in price, and I'm sure you do too. But it's
Mhm.
like, that's not the point.
Yep.
It's not some technical analysis thing like the
Yep.
rest of the fiat world. It's a different system. And if you value new technology in terms of inferior technology, its exchange rate trends towards infinity forever.
Mhm.
And so,
Yep.
yeah, Bitcoin should theoretically continue to just go up with volatility
Yep.
forever, and probably at a faster and faster rate.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
and that's going to be really painful to people to realize, because they're all going to realize it at once.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think that the stat that goes along with this, that people just like, it blew my mind. I was like, there's no way that's true. Like, it just can't be true. And again, this has nothing to do with even Bitcoin. It's that 40% of all the dollars that have ever existed, it's probably more than this now. 40% of all the dollars that have ever existed were created from 2020 onward. Like, that just sounds like an
Correct.
impossibility. Like, how can that
Correct.
possibly be true? And it's like, because
Well,
like,
that's exactly what I was saying a few minutes ago.
Yep.
And to even be worse than that, to even be more pessimistic and doomsday,
Yep.
or even that, it's like the majority of dollars to exist from 1776 or 1777 to 2030, the majority of dollars to ever be created are ahead of us
Yep.
in the next 6 years, probably.
Yep. Yep.
The majority of dollars.
Yep.
And you might say that's absurd or that's doomsday, but it's like, we've created more money the last 6 years than the 200 years before that. We'll create more
Yep.
money the next 6 years
Yep.
than those 200. It's
Yeah.
like, and then the 2040s will create more money that decade
Yep.
than every other decade ahead, and again.
Yeah, and we have digital storage, so like we can, this is just clicks on a keyboard, like literally.
Correct.
Like they in 1776 they couldn't even have printed that much, like it would be impossible. So like the fact of the way the money works. But again, I think another thing, because I agree with everything you just said, I think another thing that people don't take into account like your average people is just what. I mean, you're talking about just things like stocks, and that's one of the faulty frameworks through which they view Bitcoin is as a stock. And so they're sitting there, okay, I'm going to get some Bitcoin, I'm going to get some Ethereum, I'm going to get some of these things because they're thinking of that framework and that model. But just even they're asking, they have this high standard for Bitcoin. Like, how do you know this? How do you know this? How do you know this? Apply that same standard to the stocks that you're aping in on. Okay,
Correct.
And so this is even. I mean, you could go just strictly look at the value of them and the prices that they're valued. Like, why do you think that buying now was a good idea? Like what are you basing that on? Like, you don't even know what to believe. You don't even know how to even value these things in a lot of cases. But even if, again, but we're Christians, you know, again, depending on who's watching, like as a Christian, and when I'm talking to Christians, I'm like, but that's not even the big thing for you. That's not even your question. That's not even the end of the thing. For you, it's who are you subsidizing? Like, you're subsidizing, you're pouring lighter fluid on actual companies who are taking that money and going out and doing real things in the world. So why is it that Pfizer and all of these all of these giant companies are able to do what they're able to do? Because people, especially in this case, the majority of the funds belong to baby boomers. Baby boomers are getting ready to go into retirement. They've been kicked in the nether regions, in 2008. They've been kicked in 2020. And so, like, they're sitting here like, I'm trying to retire, and so I need to get yield wherever I can find it. And so the temptation again, I would couple this. You talked about the incentives earlier. The temptation is to prioritize multiplying the money in your bank account or your investment portfolio rather than acting in a way that is in the best interest of you, your neighbors, and all these things. And so again, the clarification that I would make with the idea of, like, if the incentives get mixed up, the incentives don't get mixed up. They don't. There's not an excuse for incentives to get mixed up in a true sense, because the incentives are what are in here. So, like, the incentives are like Jesus. Again, Jesus was tempted, all these things, but there was no pull. Jesus he's wood, and these magnet of sin is trying to pull him, and it's just not doing anything because he has nothing within him that was being pulled by these things. Yeah. But it does tempt. He was tempted. And investors today are tempted to prioritize making money and do at any cost above saying, I'm not going to invest in give fuel and strength to these companies who literally hate me and who are pimping out people all over the world for their own ends. And again, I mean, we're going to have Alex Gladstein at the conference, and he's going to talk about the IMF, who's doing this on an industrial scale. And just, all these different groups, like, where you spend your money, like, you are incentivizing in lending credibility to those organizations and to those entities.
You are diverting energy.
Yes.
If I could try to put it from a different framework.
Do it.
Money is monetary energy, and when you divert money, you are diverting energy. You are, if you have two engines, you are pouring more fuel in one engine versus the other, and it's inherently a zero-sum game. You can't put it in both.
Yep.
You can't. If you have $1, you can't put $1 in Bitcoin and bonds. You have to choose one. And so, to make the case to most churches and missionaries, again, and I've been targeting them a lot right now, but I really want to hammer the point home. Okay, let's say Bitcoin has a 90% chance of going to zero in the next 20 years. 90% chance, or 30 years. Let's say 30 years. Let's think even longer term. The next 30 years, Bitcoin has a 90% chance of going to literal zero. Not staying flat, not only going up by a factor of 2, not crashing by 90%, literal zero. Okay. What is the probability that your bonds and that your cash will decrease in value at least 90%? I mean, what? But British bonds fell 70%, like one of their funds the last 18 months. I mean, the U.S. dollar has fallen 99% in the last century,
last 100 years,
and the majority of debasement is ahead. The majority of theft is ahead. The majority of censorship is ahead. Okay, if you're diverting your monetary fuel, your monetary energy away from uncorruptible money into corruptible money and assets that survival is dependent on corruptible money, mostly speaking to bonds right now. Real estate and stocks are another discussion, but mostly speaking to bonds and cash. If you are diverting money to those things, you are exposing yourself to more censorship into the future. And
Yep.
again, there's more censorship into the future than the past, even the
Yep.
near future we're talking about.
Yep.
You're
Yep.
exposing yourself to more censorship. You are actively feeding the machine that, in my case, the Guatemalans, is actively stealing from the Guatemalans.
Yep.
And so you're trying to raise money, getting funds to send people to Guatemala to serve them, and yet your balance sheet is supporting a cause
Yeah.
that is actively fighting against
Working
that,
against them. Yeah. Yeah.
working against it. So in having 100% of your allocation to Bitcoin, you are having, let's say, a 10x increase of risk. If Bitcoin, even if, again, if Bitcoin goes down 90% and your bonds and cash, are going down 99%, and let's say the similar time period, it's like
Yep.
you have 10 times the downside. You have higher exposure to censorship risk.
Yep.
You are actively fighting against every missionary cause that you have.
Yep.
Your offerings and your storage are being debased away, so you're losing money yourself,
Yep.
even without that 10x worst case of ultimate debasement scenario. And ultimately, all that aside, that still should be a moot point to what you said a minute ago that I really loved. That at the end of the day, it's not about the money. It's about
Yep.
who do you serve.
Yep.
And do you want to have
Yes.
your allocation serve a monetary system that relies on the cult slash the pope slash the
Yep.
arbiter of monetary
Yep.
truth, Jerome Powell?
Yep.
And again, it's not him that's the problem; it's a seat he
Yep.
sits in that's the problem.
Yep.
Or do you want to have your funds allocated towards something that is actually obeying math?
Yep.
And inevitably, because it obeys math, is going to increase in value perpetually, theoretically,
Yep.
forever.
It,
So
it,
it like and people have a hard time with that. It's like it's too good to be true. It's like, well, think about Jesus. Jesus has every incentive aligned towards him,
yep.
and that Jesus is more glorified when we're most happiest to him, and we're
Yep.
most happiest when we're
Look at Luke
enjoying
listening
him.
to some John Piper up in here, quoting John Piper on the pod. Let's go.
But it's the same thing. We can be happy, and Jesus can be glorified
Yep.
and praised simultaneously.
Yep.
It's like we can have the truth set us free, and at the same time be a slave to God. Like
Yep.
it can be the same thing. They don't have to be mutually exclusive.
Yep.
And it's the same thing here with Bitcoin. We are presenting an opportunity. We're presenting an offer that we're not offering. It's just something we found that says, hey, your church or your group, and you as a person even, can make more money, be less exposed to censorship, support the growth of a system that is equal for all, and especially equal for those that need it the most, the poorest in the world, while taking energy away from a system that's robbing from them without violence.
Yep. Yeah.
It's a really big deal.
It's a huge deal, and everything that you just said is true. The other again, the other thing is like the idea of, like, talking to people all the time, like what is backing Bitcoin, and it's like, okay, let's talk about what's backing the existing financial system. The threat of violence from a global military force that has waged endless war for 50 years. Like,
Correct.
That is what is, it's you can't argue with that. That's what is protecting the monetary order that exists right now. And Bitcoin
Correct.
does the exact same thing peacefully. Like, completely, there's no
Yeah.
need for war. There's no, like, it again, and historically, this is another thing that a lot of people just don't realize, is that historically, sound currency, sound money has been one of the one way that endless war has been curtailed. Like, you
Yeah.
have, and this is what happened at the end of World War II, was that one, one side basically almost ran out of money. This is it. God,
Yeah.
God created us to be finite creatures, and like, we were not created to be beings that just have no limits. This is not this fights against God's actual design for who humanity and creation more broadly is designed to be. And so this is, again, to articulate that in a different way, in Romans 1, one of the things that the failings of the wicked, Paul describes, he says, for they refuse to acknowledge him as God. They refuse to acknowledge God as God or be thankful to him. Okay, what does it mean to acknowledge God as God? It means to acknowledge the way that he has designed the world to work. It involves submitting ourselves to his design, rather than saying, you know what, I'm going to push your design over here, and I'm going to establish my own design for how I think the world should work. Like, that is what I just described is central banking. It's fiat currency and central banking, which basically says we're going to find safety by controlling every possible thing that could go wrong within a currency. That idea, that task is a fool's errand. We can't do it, and the promise that it gives, it's doomed to fail. Like, it can't happen. And so
Surely it will not die.
100%, Luke, exactly. So
Yeah.
again, the promise is that we can find safety and security by ignoring God and by thinking hard and trusting ourselves, leaning on our own understanding, and coming up with a better system. When in reality, safety is found in like hearing and obeying God's word. Like this is again, as a Christian, this is you don't have another option for how to think about this. And
Yeah.
so this is again, these are very binary things. This is we were talking
Yeah.
about the difference between theft and honest productive work. You're talking about the difference between living and making choices, including financial choices that benefit you at the expense of other people, or that honor and obey God by not going into large amounts of debt to do these things. Like God has. I mean, we haven't even gotten to taxes and how what
I
that
know there's so much
subsidizes.
more.
There's so many things we could go, but just like
Yeah.
I mean, again, all of these things God has provided in His grace. This again, there's many other things to this. I'm not trying to like be hyperbolic with like Bitcoin, but again, what I'm saying is Bitcoin is this peaceful way that we can voluntarily opt out of all of this insanity and make an economic decision that doesn't subsidize 84 levels of insanity all over the world. So the ability, the fact that we can still today go out and take $5 or $10 or $1,000 and buy Bitcoin, again, if you're sitting on, and this is my appeal to churches and to nonprofits who, due to because of what's happened with COVID, I mean, I've talked to people who they're saying like giving is at all-time highs in some cases, and so they're sitting on large amounts. Again, it's not,
In
but again,
terms of
denominated.
a corrupted ledger,
Exactly.
is it though?
Exactly.
I don't know if it is.
Denominated in a broken denominator. Yes, it is. And so again, taking some of that and putting that into in a monetary standard that is fixed amount. It's a limited amount that again. This is the other stat. There's over 50 million millionaires in the world. There's 21 million Bitcoin, probably more like 18 million Bitcoin. Like again, it just, at this point it's malpractice to not take into account the historical, the moral, all these things. Once you see all this, like it doesn't make sense to not pay attention to this on some level and participate in it to some degree.
Yeah, if I could emphasize on that, there are 60 million millionaires. There's more like 60 than 50, I would argue.
Got you.
Um, 60 million millionaires. Okay, 200 nations in the world, more or less.
Yep.
21 million Bitcoin that will ever be. Okay, there's roughly 19 million or so today. Really, there's probably more like 14 million. Okay, most of those are already owned by people that are extremely hesitant to selling.
Yep.
So, okay, we have 3 to 4 million Bitcoin that are available for everyone else.
Yep.
Now, for we can't really get into why this would not cause wealth inequality like the world is today, but just for the moment, put that aside. Put wealth equality aside. Bitcoin actually disincentivizes wealth equality when currently we're incentivizing it. Okay. If 3 out of the so 1 in 20, if 1 in 20 millionaires wanted 1 Bitcoin, there would be no more Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Okay. If you had 100 of the billionaires in the world want 1,000 Bitcoins or 100 Bitcoins or whatever the math works out to be, like they're all gone. Okay.
Yep.
But forget the Elon Musks of the world. Forget the millionaires of the world. Okay. If you have, and I really want to emphasize this has already happened multiple times with gold. Let's say your church or you're an individual or your company and you're putting it off to learn about Bitcoin. What happens when the U.S. government, and again, they've done this multiple times with gold, cuts off the off-ramps and reprices it and putting themselves into oblivion? Okay, if I'm the United States, and again, this what I'm about to say is not morally right, but from a strategic standpoint, what I'm saying is exactly right. If I'm Jerome Powell, if I'm in charge of the United States, and I realize our dollar's declining, we have the Chinese currency rising, we have all these other currencies rising. Okay, our dollar's declining, all these other currencies are declining. The best way for us to back our dollar is to print dollars to buy Bitcoin. That's the only logical thing that makes sense, because even though we're printing our dollars and we're decreasing trust, the offset of increased trust and actually backing it with something when nobody else is backing it, I think that's the only thing that makes sense. And so people worry about, well, if I Bitcoin, the government will just ban Bitcoin. That's risky or whatever. It's like, okay, what happens when everyone starts to realize this, and they realize any fiat price for Bitcoin is legitimate, and they
Yep.
all start selling their real estate, their bonds especially, and their stocks for
Yep.
Bitcoin. All these things are collapsing. How likely do you think it is the government will come in and say, in the face of recent market instability, we have to freeze all markets, nobody's selling anything, and we're going to print a bunch of money to bail everyone out. Oh, and we might, get a Bitcoin allocation just in the,
Yep.
like,
They already
okay,
have a Bitcoin allocation. They
yeah,
actually are one of the largest holders of Bitcoin.
they do. But I mean, like a
Yeah.
real,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
like a real, like, like a
Yeah.
race.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the monetary debasement race. It's like a game of musical chairs. Everyone's
Yep.
fighting for the last seat at the table. And my emphasis there is that it is never going to be too late in a Bitcoin monetary standard for truth and beauty and goodness to prosper, but it will be too late to exit the current system. Okay,
Yep.
so as harsh as I'm about to say is, it's like if you own bonds or if you own cash or if you own any fiat tool, if you own any asset within a fiat system, in an inferior technological system, and this new superior technological system is coming for it, it's like you should already count it as a loss.
Yep.
If you have a 100% allocation to not Bitcoin, and these two crazy folks, Jordan and I, are correct about Bitcoin, you're going to lose 100% of your funds.
Yep.
And you may think that's absurd. I am right there with you. 5 years ago, I thought this was absurd. But I am here. I'm telling you, I've heard all the arguments. I believed all the arguments. I'm warning you, this is not the case. And the longer you take to figure this out, the exponentially more difficult it's going to become
Yep.
for you to make that transition, because
Yep.
everyone else is also going to be realizing it
Yep.
with you.
Yep.
And so, anyway, sorry, I'm
No, you're good.
on a little tangent there. But
I
again,
know how it is.
forget the logic, forget the risk. Like, I love, as we finish up here, there's so much more I want to talk about with you. But
Yep.
as we finish up here, forget the logic, forget the risk adjusted, whatever. Like, Jesus talked about the poor, he talked about the orphans and the widows. And I'm amazed how much life, how much quality of life could Bitcoin preserve if we're correct about this thing. If we took the corruption of money out, which means
Mm-hmm.
that the war machine, it means that corrupted healthcare and corrupted education,
Mm-hmm.
all these things that are built on top of it. Like, how many lives? Like, you're willing to spend money to send missionaries overseas. You're willing to spend money on these programs or whatever. It's like, if we were just to quantify how many lives would this monetary standard save,
Mm-hmm.
it is almost indescribable
Mm-hmm.
in my view. And I guess I'll try to describe it in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like you and me, Jordan, we have a small impact on Bitcoin, a small impact on the world because we're
Yep.
individual people. But
Yep.
it's such a big deal that if you aggregate it out, it's like I genuinely believe that people and churches and individuals like you and me right now are actually saving lives.
Mm-hmm.
Indirectly, of course, and I'm
Yep.
not, putting myself on a moral high horse. It's nothing to do with me, but it's just saying that I think if we think of Bitcoin in that worldview, that in the
Yep.
same way we want to change society, or we want to change a
Yep.
community by building a school or building a water project, it's like I genuinely think this could save lives.
Yep.
So I don't know how you thought of this. I've done the arithmetic repeatedly for over a year now. And it just blows me away. But I
Yeah.
don't know if you have any
I
thoughts on
remember
that.
no, I remember seeing that thread, and you can obviously and I feel like you're gonna unload on us all, which please do. Again, I do think I think yeah. Again, I think that there's two senses in which we should be thinking about this, right? So, what are the two denominators in which we should be thinking about this? Human lives. That's one denominator. Again, you're not thinking it's
Yeah.
it's not the U.S. dollar denominated things. You need to denominate in human lives. Like I one of the things I'm gonna be talking about at the conference is that people are God's money. Like
Mhm.
viewing people as a form of currency, like in God's accounting, is an incredibly biblical thing to do. So that's one thing. What is the human cost of these things? But then even beyond that, again, I can't as a good reformed person, you can't not focus on the end for which all things exist, which is the glory of God,
Yeah.
and people have value because they bear God's image and glory. And
Yeah.
so when you think about like what is how do we calculate the cost in glory to God to have a world that is more rightly aligned with how he designed it to function? You can't put a number on it. Like you can't put a number on like what it would like what it the value of God's creation being valued and viewed through the light that he designed it to be viewed in. And so again,
Yeah.
how like that happening through Bitcoin, it's not about Bitcoin. Take the name off it. It's got to do with a currency that or a money that values and that is structured to prioritize sowing and reaping, to prioritize low time preference thinking and action and prioritization. It all of a sudden kids are valuable again. Like and you want to have kids who can help you be more productive. I mean, there's a million things like this that again testify to God's goodness and glory in his design, and in God talking about children being a blessing and an inheritance from the Lord. God talks about children in monetary, in wealth terms. And that idea is completely foreign to people who live in the West in the way that we do, almost as a direct result of fiat currency. Like we have money that turns kids from problems into, or from solutions into problems. And so again, how do you calculate the cost denominated in glory to God of one act of obedience, or one system that more rightly brings into alignment all of these different things that are currently disjointed? How do you calculate that? You can't calculate that. We can't even, there's so many layers. I know you're going to try right now, which is what I'm waiting for, but like you can't calculate it. It's not calculable. And so, again, I just think, again, we do what is the next thing in front of us. So this is one of the questions that I get from people. It's like, well, what do you want me to do? Like, number one, we're not sitting here saying, Luke, that everyone needs to be as passionate and spend as much time trying to understand Bitcoin as we do. That's not necessary. That's not necessary for the same reason that everyone does not need to be a pastor. Every Christian doesn't need to be a pastor. They don't need to spend the time to do that. There are, like, God has geared us all differently to do different things for his glory and for the good of people everywhere. What we are saying is buy Bitcoin and start opting out of a system that hates you, everything you stand for, and start opting into a system that is a just system, that is impartial, that treats the poor and the weak with the same dignity as it does the rich and the powerful and all of these things. Bitcoin represents a more just system, and so again, Christians of all people.
It doesn't represent it. It is it.
It is it. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And so again, why does this matter? And why does it matter that why does it matter that, like, why is this uniquely, in some ways, uniquely important for people within the West, people within the United States? It's because in scriptural terms, those who are strong have an obligation to bear with has an obligation to bear with the failings of the weak and not to please themselves. And so like God has given us, within how it happened is sinful and wrong, but like God has given us wealth and strength, and he's given that to us for us to use in the same way that Christ did not consider equality with God as something to be held on to. Like, he wants us to sit there and leverage our strength and leverage these things that he's given us for the benefit of people all over the world who can't defend themselves, who can't fight for themselves, who can't, who don't have the resources to buy Bitcoin, to do these things. And so, like, to whom much is given, much is required. And so just, Christians more broadly, these churches that have balance sheets, these organizations, like, you have Christians in the United States alone, much less Europe and all these other places, you have the monetary resources to put Bitcoin at a place where it could do a whole lot more good and be so much more influential for millions and millions and potentially billions of people around the world. If you were willing to basically put in the time to understand it to a certain degree, but then we're willing to say, I don't care about what this does to my financial bottom line. Is this right? Like, is this right? Is it true? And that's where I'm going to prioritize. If you do that, then like what are, we're not, there's I mean, what are we even talking about? Like if that happens at any level, if disobedience to God just became something where people were just saying, I'm not going to do it. You know, how did a group of 12 men in the Middle East start a movement that ended up taking over the entire world, defeating every known challenger, including every empire that came up against it? How does that even happen? Completely peacefully. I said it, completely peacefully. The Crusades, minor, very, very small percentage of everything. So like, how does that happen? Okay. It happens because there was this intransigent minority who just basically said, we're not doing this. Like, we're not going to bow the knee to Caesar. We're not going to continue to act on something we know to be a lie. We're not going to do it. And so this is another one of these opportunities that, you know, Bitcoin represents. We need to disciple our kids. We need to make disciples. We need to do all these things. But one of those steps is we need to opt out of a system that is lying and predating like is making the poor and the weak prey. Like we need to stop participating voluntarily in that system. Again, we're not talking about avoiding paying taxes. We're not doing that. What we're saying is with the insofar as we have the liberty to do so in time, the resources, opting out while we can is something that just makes sense. So, yeah.
Opting out while we can just makes sense.
Yeah.
Emphasis on the while we can.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really good. I don't really know how I could follow that up. I think what you said is far more compelling. That even if we fail, even if this is wrong, it's still even if this fails, or even if the thesis is wrong, or even if it's has no chance of survival, it's still the right thing to do.
Yeah. Yep.
And that enough is compelling enough to me that I'm willing to give my time, my energy, monetary energy, and physical energy and mental energy
Yep.
to this. But the exciting thing is that not only is it the right thing to do, even if it's probable to fail,
Yep.
but that its probability of success seems to be very high. Well over 90% to me, at least. And perhaps it's lower, perhaps it's higher, more like 99.9%, which I think is very possible too. But that's the beautiful thing to me.
And this is right, and this is the reason why this matters, and the reason why this is because I think one of the things that can happen within Christian circles, and this has to do, at least in part, to a certain kind of eschatological position, is that we can be super pessimistic, and we can act. It's easy for Christians to act like there's no hope, and like things are just gonna get blow up and get worse, and all these things, and like sin always has an expiration date. Insanity doesn't last forever. Jesus wins. Like these are things where, again, this insanity that we see, we could name 50 examples. Like all these things seem so overwhelming and seem like there's like, how can we possibly get out of this thing? And like the reality is that God has been using the foolish things of the world to shame the wise for thousands of years. Like this is what he does. God uses the foolish things of the world. Faith is foolish. The poor are foolish. All of these things, God prides himself on using the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. And there are a few things that on their face are more foolish than magic internet money. I'll be the first one to say it. And yet when you dig down deep, Bitcoin is actually way more like profound and wise and ancient and good than seems possible the first time you hear about it. And so
logical.
And logical, exactly. And so, and this is I wanted to mention this earlier. Like again, there's things that we read. So I read that J. Gresham Machen quote. I posted something quote from George Orwell that was like 50 or 60 years old. I posted another quote the other day from C.S. Lewis, where it looks like they wrote him yesterday. And how is it that these men could speak so eloquently and accurately about situations that would happen, that they would still be meaningful decades into the future. How is that possible? And it's because reason is a time machine. Like, God has given us reason to allow us to take the time to think about where is this, where are these actions going to take us? Where are these decisions going to take me? God has given us reason. It's what separates us from animals. The ability to reason is one of the things that separates us from animals, and it's this gift that God has given us so that we can plan out and plot for His glory and for the good of people everywhere. And so again, Bitcoin seems crazy, but it's logical. Like it's bulletproof logically when you go down the rabbit hole for it.
And you mentioned spiritual, theological leaders, but even outside that circle, you have people that predicted it. Yep. Just by reason and by thinking through. You have, I mention all the time, Nikola Tesla in the year 1900 was the first person to predict what today we describe Bitcoin. And then you had Henry Ford in 1921. And then you had Freeman, you had Zimmerman, you had Finney, of course, and Adam Back, of course. You had, the further out in the 20th century you go, the more and more people you have that are predicting it. But all the way back, before flight was achieved and before the automobile was out there, and it's still in the infancy of the photograph. There were people out there, granted probably you could count them all in a single hand, that understood that Bitcoin was coming and that it was inevitable. And the beauty to me is that it's here, and the case for it, if you just put aside your ego and you just recognize that the current system is a violation of physics and it's a violation of God's law, if you just recognize that, and you recognize that nobody can do it, and inherently a system that respects that is inherently worth infinitely more than that system, then it becomes the most asymmetric trade in terms of making money ever in human history, and it also becomes one of the most moral things you can do with your. Well, it becomes the most moral thing you can do with your savings. Mm-hmm. There is no more moral cause than saving your money in Bitcoin. Yes, there's giving, and yes, there's consumption. Obviously, those are only three things you do with your money: to give it, to live it, or to spend it, or to save it. But as far as saving goes, it becomes so obvious to me, even if it is to fail, even if it is to die, that it's a superior one. But I guess just to quantify what.
I was just going to say. So, like one of the things that you're describing that it's really important is like. What is the right thing to do? I am not a situational ethicist, so let me just get that out of the way. But there is essential with situational ethics is true and valuable. I will give you one instance. Is the one of the proverbs that says, rebuke a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. The very next verse says, do not rebuke a fool according to his own folly. And so you're like, well, what do I do here? And what that is designed to show you is that there's different situations that call for either one of those things. And so there is a time to save, and there is a time to not save. And there is a time to, lie. Like you go through the whole Bible, and there's tons of examples where you have Rahab lies straight to, these people's face. The Hebrew midwives lie right to Pharaoh's face. There's a time to do lots of different things. And so we're at a point where, opting into Bitcoin is one wise thing to do. It's a timely, Bitcoin it's a timely thing that has come at the perfect time, I would argue. It showed up, and it allows us to prioritize what God prioritizes. I'll give you one more example. You're talking about Tesla. We talked about, there's this incredible, I think it's Buckminster Fuller quote about, about energy. About a currency based on energy. I was reading a book by Wendell Berry. I think it was called Household Economics. I've got it around here somewhere. But so the quote so I'm reading it, and this is one of the quote that he has. It's in one of the first pages. It says, "Some time ago we were laboring." So sorry for those who don't know, Wendell Berry is an ass farmer. he's a donkey farmer. He doesn't use technology beyond to do any of his farming. He's a fifth generation farmer. He lives in Kentucky. And so just doesn't use hardly any technology. And so he was writing, and he said this. He said, "Some time ago, we were laboring to define the causes of the modern ruination of farmland. We finally got around to the monetary economy. I said that an economy based on energy would be more benign because it would be more comprehensive. And I read that like 2 years ago and thought, or a year and a half ago, and thought to myself, what on earth?
Yeah.
Like how incredible that this guy who is, um, you know, not a big technology guy, recognized like the value of tying energy and like the role of energy and how it affects our day-to-day life, and how transformative it would be to have a currency that was based on energy. And that's what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is a currency or a money that is based on energy. It
Yeah.
monetizes energy. It's incredible.
I wanted to ask, what do you mean by there's a time to lie? Like you're not saying that lying is ever, I don't know if it was just the wording you
So,
used,
so
perhaps not.
what I'm saying is that I agree with God's word, and so there's a situation. For example, you have the Hebrew midwives who came to Pharaoh. Pharaoh told them,
Pharaoh. Yeah.
"I want you to kill the babies. I want you to kill the Hebrew babies when they come up." And so the Hebrew midwives, what did they do? They went to Pharaoh and they said, "Hey, listen, Pharaoh. These Hebrew women are just super vigorous, and so by the time we get there, they just keep having they've already had their babies." And so basically, you have this situation where, like, what was going on there? The Hebrew midwives lied directly to Pharaoh's face. Like, they lied directly to him. Now, why? Was it just for any reason? No, it's because he was telling them to murder. Okay, so he was telling them, Pharaoh was trying to tell them to take the right of life and death that belongs to God alone and take it into their own hands and kill the innocents. And so what I am not saying in any by any stretch of the imagination is that we can just lie for whatever reason. But
Okay.
there is
All
a
right.
time, there comes a time where wicked men throughout history have tried to wield the truth as a weapon against the innocent and the righteous. And so this is something where, you have the witness of the church, going back thousands of years, where there is a limit to humanity's obligation to tell the truth to people who wish to use it as a weapon, to hurt innocent.
I guess a final closing discussion or closing remarks, perhaps, that I would
Mm-hmm.
like to say, and then a question I'd like to ask you.
Sure.
Um, we were mentioning the quantification of human life. I think I think ultimately, without getting into math, Bitcoin could easily save 50 million to 100 million lives this century. So the next 77 years. So like at least a million lives a year,
Mm-hmm.
and then probably next century at least a billion.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that might sound absurd to people, but if you do the math, and I've done them, I've posted it before. I'll be doing it more in the future, but it's really not that absurd. If you just have society be a little more efficient, you have a little less corruption, you have a little less war, you have a little better health care, you have treatment a little, you have medicine a little less expensive. If you just do these things, in education a little less expensive, and energy a little cheaper, like just single digit marginal percentages of these things. If you just moderately increase the efficiency, if you just moderately divert incentive away from corruption and away from distortion and towards
Mm-hmm.
truth and reality,
Mm-hmm.
and having prices deflate as they naturally should be instead of inflate. If you just do that, the 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 number of years saved on human lives and the number of humans saved, it is just it is almost unbelievable. And all that to say to the Christians out there is that we talk a lot about inflation, a lot about censorship, a lot about the moral thing and the right thing. Okay, fundamentally, I believe the single most urgent and the single largest humanitarian effort in the 21st century is Bitcoin. As counterintuitive as that might seem, it's like if you're ignoring this, you're not just putting yourself at higher censorship risk. You're not just risking all your money. You're not just risking your retirement money. You're not just risking all the funds and responsibility you've been asked to steward by the creator of the universe. I believe you are genuinely neglecting or genuinely ignoring the single greatest gospel opportunity of being able to preach to people that, as you were mentioning before, have their eyes open for the first time in the new world, and also the largest humanitarian effort in the world. And ultimately, that's why I'm begging people and I'm begging churches to just take 1%. Just 1%. Bitcoin's $30,000. If you have 3 million on your balance sheet or whatever, just that's a whole Bitcoin. That's just 1% is what I'm begging institutions to do right now, especially Christian institutions. Now, if they're overseas, if they're if they're not in Europe or the United States, maybe they need more like 5% or 10%,
Hmm.
maybe even higher if they're in Lebanon or Argentina or somewhere like that. But I'm just making that encouragement to them now. I hope that they've watched this. I know most won't, but I make that encouragement because in a few years, I'm going to be probably begging people, you and me, for 5%, 5 to 10 times as much, and then it'll be more and
Yep.
more, more until you've lost everything.
Hmm. Yep.
So, um, yeah. So all I have to say is that's what I would encourage. I would encourage most pastors or churches or individuals. Again, this applies to individuals. If you're still not sure, I would say, and this is my question for you: what would be the single most practical thing that you would tell people in the most succinctly response as possible? I would say, if you own real estate, stocks, and bonds, the highest risk, most downside, fastest downside, most moral thing is your bonds. Get rid of the bonds and allocate to Bitcoin. That would be my point of view. Real estate and stocks, that's another discussion. But I think the most urgent one is churning bond allocation into Bitcoin allocation. And if you're uncomfortable, like literally $100, like just make the commitment to get off zero and to move in that direction because the world is moving that way anyway. It's moving to this more moral, this more humanitarian, this more equitable, and this system that is more based on reality, scriptural reality and physical reality.
Hmm.
So just $100, get off zero, and then reach 1% as quick as you can and keep learning as quick as you can. That would be my encouragement for those out there ending this conversation wondering what they should do next. If you could give people one takeaway, now this is financial advice, of course, what would you say? Where should somebody that either for themselves or for their on behalf of others, where do you recommend they start?
I mean, I honestly, man, where would I start in terms of like resources, or in terms of you're talking about just like actually buying Bitcoin?
That where like what is the next thing they should do after they close out of this podcast?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, probably just I would probably say just go buy some Bitcoin. I mean, just buying some. I mean, honestly, like I mean,
It's
that's a
that
very
simple.
practical step. I mean,
But
I
it's that
think
simple.
yeah, it
Yeah,
really is. And
direct
again,
monetary energy towards a more moral system. It's
yeah,
that simple. Yeah.
and so it doesn't, again, to the point we mentioned earlier, like it doesn't require to talk for 2 hours, do all these things. Like the simple solution is just go buy some Bitcoin, and then again, move on with your life. Like that, I mean, just go back to serving your serving your church, serving your neighbor, whatever it is. Again, it can be that simple. Again, maybe another thing, like if you have like a Bitcoin meetup, like if some of this has been appealing to you at all. Well, actually, there's kind of a self-serving answer to this question, which would be, hey, come to Miami, come to Miami, come to
Yes,
the
yes. Go to
conference.
Miami. Use code
Yeah,
Broyles for 15% off. We'll
exactly.
be
Yeah.
there.
So
Be
I mean
quite blessed.
but that
Yeah.
honestly will be. I mean, the thing about the conference is like you are going to have. I mean, we have a number of pastors who are going to be speaking, and
Yeah.
these are real pastors. These aren't like prosperity. Like you're not going to be like being
There's
told
no prosperity
it's
gospel.
it's
None.
that's
I hate it.
awful and ridiculous.
Yes.
Um, but no, you're going to have people. We're going to have a panel with all missionaries, like real
Yeah.
missionaries who are ministering in the Middle East, who are ministering to refugees here in the States, like people who they're ministering to people all over the world who are leveraging Bitcoin, to serve those communities in a variety of different ways. So again, if you're looking for more, people who are again who have been thinking about these issues and who are able to speak to them in different ways, like that would be one opportunity. We do also offer like a streaming option for those who aren't going to be able to make it to Miami. So and again, the promo code still applies for that. So those are all available at tgfb.com.
Yeah.
Again, we would love to just love to help Christians understand what Bitcoin is, and why Bitcoin and sound money more broadly matters. So again, you can find us at tgfb.com. I believe there's a contact form there. You can reach out to us, and we'd love to help you,
Yep.
With whatever next step you need. So
Yep. Well, thank you, Jordan. I really appreciate it. I hope both individuals and institutions and churches all make that step as soon as they can, because I believe it's only going to get more difficult. And I believe your time and my time is only going to get busier
yeah,
as the adoption only accelerates from here.
yep,
So all that to say is I hope people take their first step, and I hope to be able to talk to you into the future, even though we're only both going to become more busy.
Yep.
So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
No, appreciate you, Luke. Thank you so much. We'll talk soon.